So I do hope that this webinar helps you to start that process of extending your skills to offer these services. And I'm delighted to have several guests on the webinar today. I'm joined by Cara Klassen, who's BLP's Inclusion Specialist, Nalini Singh from Fiji Women's Rights Movement, and Sandra Mendes, who's BLP's Communications and Impact Manager. We'll be discussing why diversity, equity and inclusion are indeed important business issues, and we'll then discuss ways that business advisors can help their clients with diversity, equity and inclusion. And Sandra's also going to outline how to access BLP's GESI Subsidy, that's the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Subsidy, to support SMEs with GESI issues. Firstly though, let me quickly run through the format for the webinar. So now that we've started, can I ask that you please keep your microphone and your cameras off, as this helps to ensure that everyone can hear the speaker. Please feel free though, at any time throughout the webinar, to ask questions by using the chat box, which you'll find in the top right-hand corner of your window. We do welcome your thoughts and your comments throughout the webinar. At any stage, you can pop something in there, but there will also be a specific time for questions at the end. So yeah, please do pop your comments into that box as you go, if you wish. Now, we are recording the webinar today, and the recording's started already, and so it will be available afterwards if you want to recap on anything, or if you want to share it with your colleagues. It will be saved on BLP's website, along with all of our previous webinars in the series, and actually all our other series as well. And I do encourage you to use these resources to recap or to extend your knowledge across those wider advisory areas. I'll give you a quick rundown of what we do here at Business Link Pacific for those who may not be aware. So firstly, BLP is managed by DT Global, and it's funded by the New Zealand government. We work in 8 countries, 8 Pacific countries, which are listed on this slide. BLP helps SMEs to find suitable local advisors to help them with their business issues, and then it helps SMEs with the cost of those advisors' services through the subsidy scheme. All BLP approved advisors go through a quality assurance process, which includes both a due diligence process and a competency assessment. So SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises accessing professional advice, can be assured that they're really getting some top quality people. We work through local advisors because we know businesses do better when they have access to knowledgeable people who are on the ground with them. BLP also has in-country representatives in each of our countries. So our business service managers are locally based, and their role is to help both SMEs and business advisors to access and make full use of the suite of BLP services. And the BLP services include our suite of business tools like the Business Diagnostic Tool, the Business Health Check, Business Continuity Planner, Finance Finder. These are all great tools that help SMEs to sort out important business issues. There's also, of course, our finance facility, which helps SMEs to access finance. And no doubt you're aware of the adaptation grants that BLP is offering. We're currently actually assessing the second round of grant applications. And I must say there's been a huge number of applicants in this round. And BLP also helps with concessionary lending as well, and has developed partnerships with key financial institutions across the Pacific. And of course, our services also include professional development and learning opportunities for advisors, not just through our webinars and podcasts, which are great resources, and they certainly do provide interesting insights into doing business in the Pacific, but we also provide customised professional development support for advisors as well. This slide shows a little bit about where we've got to. So we've now got actually well over 130 approved advisory firms in our advisor network. We've supported over 900 SMEs to access advisory services through our subsidy scheme. And this slide also shows the usage of those online tools that I mentioned, the business health check diagnostic, etc. They're being well utilised, with around almost 5,000 analyses being completed using those tools. So that's great to see. And actually the Business Link Pacific services have supported the creation of about 800 new jobs in our 8 countries. And it's great to see that probably more than half of these, 52%, have been taken up by women, which I'm sure our guests today are going to be very pleased to hear that. So let me now introduce you to our 3 guests today. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Cara Klassen. She's our Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Advisor. She has over 10 years experience in international development, specifically focusing on inclusion in market systems. She's led multiple research teams focusing on understanding the barriers to women's economic empowerment. Cara is currently based in Kenya. She's on the board of a Kenyan Impact Investment Fund, which focuses on accelerating inclusive and sustainable development in key market sectors globally. She's designed gender strategies, conducted gender assessments, training, workshops on women's economic empowerment for NGOs, government departments, and the private sector. So she has an absolute wealth of experience and knowledge on the topic that we're going to be talking about today. So welcome along, Cara. I'd also like to introduce you to Nalini Singh, who's joining us from Fiji. Now, Nalini is a feminist, and she's a social development specialist with over 20 years experience in design, implementation, management, and evaluation of women's rights and development programs in the Asia-Pacific region. Her particular interests are on issues of women's sexual and reproductive health and rights and organisational capacity strengthening. Prior to joining Fiji Women's Rights Movement over 4 years ago, Nalini was based in Kuala Lumpur, working in advocacy and capacity building for the Asia Pacific Resource and Research Centre. And before that, she was in Chiang Mai with the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development. And Nalini is a graduate of the University of South Pacific with a Bachelor of Arts. So welcome along to you too, Nalini. And also, I'd like to introduce you to Sandra Mendes, who oversees BLP's communications, gender equality and social inclusion initiatives, and monitoring, evaluation and learning strategies, as well as our action plans. So she's a communications specialist with a background in international development and business. She has 20 years of economic development experience working in businesses across the Pacific Islands, Asia and Latin America. So welcome along, all 3 of you ladies. Thank you so much for joining me today. And Cara, I would particularly like to acknowledge you for joining us from Kenya, where I think the time is about 3:30 or something, 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and you're looking pretty good, I have to say.
Oh, this is me all the time. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, great that you could join us. We appreciate it. And Nalini and Sandra, thank you both as well. You're both not quite so far away as Cara, but also appreciate you being here. And actually, Nalini, you're based in Fiji. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do at the Fiji Women's Rights Movement, and tell us how you support SMEs? Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Nalini. Yep. If you could just unmute that. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Just putting my video on so everybody can see me, and I'm just going to turn it off in a little while. But thank you. Happy to be here. Fiji Women's Rights Movement, for some of us who are aware of FWRM as an acronym, we have been working on the larger issues of eliminating discrimination, all forms of discrimination against women, as well as promoting gender equality for over 35 years now. In Fiji, and we do this work across with many different types of organizations, community-based, feminist, trade unions, and informal alliances, etc. And in terms of the core issues, I would have to say that under the banner of, because we are a organization that focuses on women's specific issues, a key issue for us has been women in the world of work, whether we are looking at it through an economic empowerment lens or we are looking at it through the elements of decent work, which incorporates issues like violence against women in the workspace, which looks at issues of equal pay for equal value of work. It looks at issues of recognizing unpaid care work, and of course the organizing, and the whole gamut of rights and protection for women workers. And as a sort of a niche area for us here in Fiji and perhaps in the Pacific has been that we're perhaps one of the only organizations that has consistently and systematically researched and advocated for policies around, stopping sexual harassment in the workplace. And, this is an area of work that has, garnered a lot of traction because we, do have a high prevalence rate of sexual harassment in the workplace. According to our own prevalence studies, we have the figure at 1 in 5 women now who experience this, and this is extremely high, and therefore it is we've taken this as a key area of work for us to ensure that we try and address these issues with as many organizations, including businesses as well, to see how to address this issue through either building a understanding amongst organizations and businesses on what exactly is sexual harassment and violence against violence that women experience in the workplace, and how can
Mm.
that be done through a lens of gender equality and elimination of discrimination against women. So I leave it there. There's you're welcome to look at our website to have an understanding of all the other different areas of work that we do that cuts across the spectrum of gender equality and women's rights.
Great. No, that's fantastic, Nalini, to hear that your organisation is there, and you've been going for quite a number of years. So it's great to see that you're offering that sort of support, and certainly we'll be discussing some of those services that you offer as well. So thank you for that. Okay, so all right, let's get started on our first topic then, which is why diversity, equity, and inclusion are so important for business. And Machikara, perhaps you can firstly give us some definitions of these terms so that we're all on the same wavelengths. Perhaps I could ask you to just do that first before we kick into this topic.
Sure, yeah. So diversity in the workplace is really about starting to acknowledge and recognize that there is difference. It's very simple and straightforward, and it's starting to accept that those differences exist, whether it's based on gender, race, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation, and much more. Equity, on the other hand, is the process of ensuring that processes and programs within a workplace, or any other setting for that matter, are impartial, fair, and provide equal possible outcomes for every individual. So it's really starting to take steps to make sure that people can have the same outcomes in the workplace, not just opportunities. And then finally, inclusion is that active part of really trying to instill and encourage a sense of belonging within a workplace. So making sure it's about improving the ability, the opportunities, and dignity of those who may sometimes feel disadvantaged in a workplace, and even those who are are not disadvantaged, and trying to encourage a sense of belonging within each and every single employee. It works at collaboration and being more supportive and creating very respectful environments. So it's a very active kind of word, basically. So what I like to kind of think about the difference between diversity and inclusion. Diversity is being invited to a dance or a party, and then but then inclusion is being asked to dance. So it's like, okay, we're here, I'm participating, but now I'm actually being asked to participate. I'm just observing as a diversity, and then inclusion is kind of being able to participate and really experience the fullness of that space.
Right. So what you're saying then is a workplace could be really diverse and have lots of different people, men, women, different religions, ages, ethnicities, backgrounds, etc. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the organization's inclusive per se. You've got to actually do something a little bit extra to just having lots of different sorts of people with different backgrounds in your organization. So you've got to deliberately design for inclusion effectively. That's kind of what you're saying, isn't it? And it seems to me that inclusion is actually about people feeling valued as well. And you know, we all like to feel that we're of value to the organization that we work for. So sort of reflecting on my work experiences, it seems to me that, you know, one of the key ways that businesses can be inclusive is to share information and ensure that they have open communications with their employees. You know, I've noticed that often employees, you know, they often feel that they're not included because they don't know what's going on. But that's not to say that employees need to know everything that's going on in their workplace. But if they understand that there's a process for information sharing and communication, then you have a better culture around inclusion. I mean, also all too often, I suppose, I've seen employees feel excluded because their managers haven't communicated what's happening, even though there might be nothing happening that they need to know of. Yeah, I don't know. That's just some of my reflections on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that is exactly one way to start to encourage better diversity and inclusion within a workplace. Because if I don't know what's going on in my workplace, then I feel less involved and I feel less ownership and lead to a lot of other negative consequences as a result. So the business case, you know, that for doing these things does exist.
Okay, so tell us about the business case for diversity and inclusion. Why is it?
I mean, yeah, I will. Yeah, exactly. It is. Well, I think, I mean, from lots and lots of studies have been conducted to really just to highlight, you know, the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion. Lots of different organizations and business-focused companies are doing research to highlight the importance of these types of initiatives within a workplace. Prime among them, I mean, these studies have found that businesses that do establish these types of principles around diversity, equity, and inclusion, they 99% of the time outperform their peers. And so, I mean, the studies show this, but then, okay, well, what does that mean? And where in specific do these changes actually start to take place? So as you can see from the image on your right, it was kind of designed by McKinsey, and they put out a report called Diversity Wins, How Inclusion Matters. And you'll see that the blue bar shows that organizations with diversity of gender are 25% more likely to be profitable than their peers. And then it shows from the green bars that 36% of organizations are more likely to be profitable than their peers when they have diversity of ethnicity. So having diversity in gender, ethnicity, and age, I mean, this graph doesn't show that, but it really can improve the profits and the outcomes for businesses. You know, and then in specific things like perspectives, more perspectives can create more ideas. It can address skills shortages because we're looking beyond just the norm or the people that we've always looked to. It does create a competitive advantage, both in terms of being attractive for people who may want to work for your organization, as well as obviously increasing the profits of your organization. People feel like they want to perform better when there's more diverse perspectives and presence of people within an organization, and they feel more satisfied as well. And often the retention rates of organizations are much better when there is more diversity. And then there's a lot of reasons in terms of legal reasons to continue to promote these types of principles as well, where discrimination is against the law, and you know, maintaining improving diversity and inclusion is a part of making sure that we adhere to those laws as well. So that's just a few things that provide the business case for, but I mean, there's a lot more.
And I think, you know, we often forget that actually our customers are diverse as well. You know, we've got many different customers that come from different backgrounds too. So being able to draw upon different ideas and views from within our business also helps us have a wider reach towards customers as well. So
Exactly.
tell us a little bit more about women on boards. So what's the business case for having more women on boards?
Well, I mean, as we've said before, having women in leadership roles is so critical. And another study conducted by the Harvard Business Review found that firms with women on their boards outperform and perform significantly better than those without women on their boards. And they had far better returns than those without women on their boards as well. So you can see from this graph that that, you know, both when they had women on their boards, they were better performed, and they performed way better than those without women on their boards. And I think it's not easy. And so I know, Barbara, you mentioned that I'm on the board for an impact investing firm here in Kenya, and I'm the only woman on the board at the moment. And, you know, in speaking with the founder and executive director, it's very challenging, especially as a man, to find other non-men to participate on the board. And, you know, people often gravitate toward people like them. And in addition, people are willing to you meet with people who are accessible and who are right there in front of you. And so he talks about the fact that, well, you know, this person has introduced me to that person who happens to be a man, and he's an excellent man. So I know at this point I don't have the energy and time to develop a strategy to try to find more women to participate on my board. So I'm going with who is shown and presented to me as an excellent option. And it is a dilemma that I think a lot of people experience, because as much as they want to be diverse, their present moment doesn't necessarily allow them, or doesn't make it easy for them to take that step to try to be more diverse. And so it really is it has to be an active strategy and approach to starting to make these types of changes, because it definitely isn't easy.
And that's so what you're saying is that also expands the pool for the future as well, which is also an equally important factor. I've actually been on a couple of boards as well where I've been the only woman, and in very male dominated industry sectors, like the manufacturing sector was one of them. And I've noticed that sometimes you need to get some critical mass to have a voice, to have any impact. Otherwise, when you're the only woman on a board, sometimes it's quite hard to just get to bring issues to the table. I mean, I can give you an example. When I was the only female on a board, I noticed that often the discussions would kind of linger on the topics like, the vehicle purchases for the organisation, what sort of cars should we have in our fleet, and what was good value for money, etc. But things like employee satisfaction, training and HR matters, they were often skipped over. We didn't really spend much time discussing those. So, and the other thing as well, actually, is I noticed that HR items, they were often at the end of the agenda. So often we didn't get enough time to talk about those things. And interestingly, one of these boards, they also had a philosophy of paying to make HR problems go away quickly rather than working through issues collaboratively. So I suppose I found that I was a lone voice on that particular board, and it was really hard to actually get to talk about some of those other issues that I felt were really important. And the only thing that really changed it was when a couple more women came on the board, and then collectively we got more airtime effectively in the meetings to talk about the issues that we wanted to talk about.
Well, and in the end, Barbara, I bet that those organizations benefited more greatly once having your voice, but then when you were able to share the voice and the issues with other women who were, caring, that also improved the organization's performance, I'm sure, because those issues that you're talking about, HR and training and professional development, are critical as well, but they can get overlooked.
Well, that's right, and quite frankly, for us, we felt that was way more important than what sort of car we bought. Anyway, I guess we all talk about what we're interested in.
Yeah, true.
Okay, so yeah, tell us some more. This is really interesting.
Yeah, so the stats here kind of highlight some of the other reasons for why an organization should work toward diversity and inclusion. For example, global companies with strong female leadership, as we talked about before, enjoy increased returns on equity per year compared to those without women. So you can see from the graph that 10.1% of organizations that had women on the board did much better. Mixed gender boards outperform all male gender boards, and the financial gains for organizations continue to improve with the more women that you have in executive leadership roles, as well as profits continue to increase too. So I think I could go on and on about all the different statistics, but I think it's important to highlight that even a 1% increase in diversity can improve and lead to as much as a 9% increase in performance. So you don't even have to make that big of a change to start to see improvements. So racial and gender diversity are each associated with increased sales revenue, more customers, as you were speaking to earlier, Barbara, greater market share, and greater relative profits. And racial diversity is also associated with greater market share. So the more diverse that your organization is, but also the more diverse your customer base is, the better you do as a company and as an organization. So trying to go beyond what you think is easy will improve your business overall, essentially.
And it sounds like there's been quite a body, there's quite a big body of research now to back up what you're talking about here, like some of these facts and figures. There's a lot of information that sits behind this. So I guess you're drawing on a lot of research that's been done.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's become more and more important. Just I mean, it's always should be important, but it's made kind of taken front stage more recently in the last 10, 20 years because of all of the movements that are taking place. And, over time, even 50, 70 years ago, with the suffragette movement all the way to today, I mean, things are slowly changing, but people aren't changing fast enough. And often businesses aren't necessarily, don't see the business case because it feels like a lot more work. But I think that's why these reports and this research is being conducted, to really demonstrate to businesses that even though it might feel like a lot more work, it's going to benefit you in the long run.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so let's move on to our next topic then, which is thinking about more the role of business advisors. And, they're pretty well positioned to advise our small and medium-sized enterprises on not just the range of business issues in their technical area, but also other things like how to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, Cara, talk to us about that first topic there, addressing unconscious bias. That's one way. What can business advisors do? How can they help their clients to address that and help them become more diverse and equitable and inclusive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the unconscious bias piece is actually so common, and I mean we've kind of alluded to it already by kind of gravitating to people that we know or that are like us. It's an unconscious bias that we have. What unconscious bias means is it's an association or an attitude about a person or social group that, while it's not plainly expressed, it does operate in the background and often beyond our control and even our awareness. And it can often inform our perceptions and influence how we make decisions and how we behave. So when we think of so for example, we've got a variety of examples around unconscious bias in this slide here. So beauty bias is about judging people based on how they look. And so if I have a beauty bias, I might select someone who I think is more beautiful or looks better than another person when they've both come in to be interviewed by me. And this often, we'll talk about this a bit later, but it does show up a lot in hiring and within a workplace and maybe promotions and things like that. The affinity bias is again about hiring people who are the same as ourselves. And again, this isn't often an intentional thing. It's just something that naturally happens because, oh, we could talk about the same thing because our cultures are similar. So I could talk about, that I love football and so do you. And so we went on and on about football, but then and so that kind of collegiality existed. And so then I wanted to hire that person because I felt like we really understood each other. But then the other person who might not be from my culture missed out on that just because we weren't able to discuss football in the same way.
And that's quite interesting, isn't it?
Effect
Sorry to butt in there, but that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because often when we recruit people, businesses talk about, we want somebody that's going to fit in our organization. And sometimes that kind of bias creeps in at that point. I mean, yes, having somebody that fits in your culture is important, but you also have to reflect on, where are you missing out on somebody who perhaps would bring something new to your culture.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I think what my culture is as an individual, and I love football, doesn't necessarily, that's not necessarily cultural. It's more just a personal thing for me, but shouldn't necessarily translate to the culture that I create in my organization, where everyone should love football. And if everyone loved football, then what about all the other great sports that are out there that could also encourage people to get out and be active and things like that, as an example? So yeah, I mean, I think that culture that we want to create in an organization can be about diversity and inclusion, which then appreciates these differences and appreciates perspectives that are new, like you're saying. I mean, some of these other biases around confirmation bias, so we will look for evidence to back up our first impression. So if someone, you know, said something in an interview that, you know, or in a meeting that, you know, didn't sit right with me, then I will always be colored by what they said, even though, and you know, my first impression of them might be, you know, well, they obviously don't know what they're talking about because they made this one mistake about, you know, a statistic about women in leadership or something, and then I will continue to bias against them when I'm thinking about maybe hiring them or something. Attribution bias is how we perceive the actions of others. So that's simply, you know, trying to perceive the actions where, you know, if someone is acting a certain way, then I will assume that they are this way. There's lots of different biases around there that I don't even want to mention, just because it feels like, you know, it is a bias, and it is often stereotypes that we create about people that are not accurate at all. Conformity bias is changing opinions to conform with the group. So, you know, when there's enough people simply taking one position, I may feel very nervous to share my opinion, which differs from the group's opinion. And so then I will simply conform to that opinion. And that is such a risky thing for an organization when we want to hear, like when leadership doesn't allow for people to share different perspectives, then it can create this conformity bias because people don't want to share their own opinions. And then the halo effect is perceived as having more positive traits than others. So it's about me thinking that I have better, you know, qualities and I have more experience, or because I've done a few more things than someone else, or I've done things that are different from someone else, that makes me better than them. And so all of these kind of can show up in the background as we're engaging with our colleagues or people that work for us, or that people that we're thinking of hiring or even developing partnerships with, and they can often be negative and have negative impacts on our business.
And I know I was just reflecting, we've actually used this slide before in a previous webinar, but it's so important, and it's so great to just kind of put these typical areas in front of us, because we do need constant reminding of it. And I suppose we kind of develop unconscious biases from our experiences and social conditioning and our culture. And I suppose you can even have like an unconscious bias when you meet someone who reminds you of someone else that you know. You know, you often assume that person's going to have the same sort of personality as the other person. So what is it like? I suppose here the challenge is to just remind yourself and challenge yourself to be aware of your biases and test them out and see whether they hold true and are appropriate. Hey, that's the sort of approach that you'd take.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the key. It's definitely starting to be aware of them, and you know, they don't go away automatically because they're often so ingrained. But it is about being aware of them and creating and setting yourself up for success, so that those unconscious biases are harder to allow to show up where possible, whether it's, you know, when you're reviewing CVs and applications for jobs, maybe trying to not look at the names of people at the start so that you can really understand what they have to offer before you look at their name, and then you might have a bias around whether it's a woman or a man, or if they're from a particular ethnicity because their name shows that, or something like that. So really trying to limit as many of those as possible can be helpful.
Yeah. And I suppose, you know, sometimes those experiences and that social conditioning can be useful to us, but at times like that you've just mentioned in recruitment, for example, they do get in the way and they give you that lens that's perhaps not so useful. I suppose to me, this conversation is really important for business advisors because it's actually about developing empathy. And of course, that is a fundamental attribute that business advisors need. So, you know, if you can put aside, if you can learn what your unconscious biases are, and if you can put them aside, and it helps you to really develop empathy for your clients, for the businesses that you're supporting, and that is such an important skill set for business advisors.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so the sort of places you mentioned before, the sort of areas in business where unconscious bias shows up. Can you just run through those with us?
Yeah, you know, as we've spoken about before already, recruitment and hiring is a common place where these biases show up. Obviously in promotion, and they can show up very unconsciously where you're promoting people you see, and maybe there's a woman who's been on maternity leave, and so she's not even being considered, and so you're promoting the person that, you know, is there in front of you, and he or she may be a man or a woman, but, you know, and then it also comes out in remuneration, where, you know, if often they'll look at the pay of employees, and women are often paid less than men, and it depends on the country. They've done lots of studies, anywhere from 60% to, you know, even higher or lower, but on average about 60%. Women are paid 60% of what men are paid. Type of work, it can show up where we will only hire women as secretaries, and, you know, men are the managers. You know, we don't, or they take on engineering or technical roles, and women are more in the support staff type roles. Meetings, we often allow certain people to speak and don't try to create space for others to speak. And that is very easy to do because there are certain people who have had the floor for so long, they are willing to speak and they feel confident. And that often is, more times than not, men than women who have that space to speak. And so it continues on in the meetings. They share their voice. Women's voices aren't heard, and they're not always encouraged. So it's really critical to try to highlight these realities to help to encourage some change. Again, in teamwork, similarly, you know, people are placed in different teams, and certain people take on leadership roles, not necessarily because they're good at it, or maybe not giving others the chance to take on these roles simply because of these biases. Leadership, as I mentioned, in marketing messages, it's sometimes the easy way out to talk about, you know, to target women and men, and, you know, that certain products are for women and certain products are for men, rather than thinking about people who clean houses, and that might be women or men, but we want to go to the easy way, and that often then misses out on reaching other people who might also clean houses if I'm selling a cleaning product, for example. Food and events and holidays, I mean, these are also areas where, you know, our biases can show up. And even in policies, people often create policies not necessarily aware that there are differences, or that differences need to be acknowledged, because experiences of different people, whether they're woman or man or youth or something like that, are different. And so these differences need to be acknowledged, and policies designed to then acknowledge those differences. I mean, a very obvious example would be that, you know, women who get pregnant and then they give birth, they often need to take time off work. but creating a policy that allows for ample time to be taking care of your child, but then allowing that woman to come back and take on the same role and not miss out on opportunities, whether it's promotion or professional development. That's a very obvious example where policies aren't necessarily designed to consider those realities, because they shouldn't be penalized for having a child. And often that is the case because it's the easy way out. We don't design these, often policies aren't designed to consider those realities.
No, thank you for that. I think business advisors can certainly help their SME clients by having a chat about unconscious bias. But perhaps I can now bring Nalini into the conversation. And Nalini, perhaps I could also ask you to comment on ways that business advisors can facilitate the incorporation of diversity, equity, and inclusion for their clients in their business. What sort of approaches do you take when supporting your clients?
Yes. So for FWRM, Fiji Women's Rights Movement, as I was explaining, we have over 3 decades of experience working in the area of promoting gender equality, and looking at ways of removing all forms of discrimination against women, one being in the space of work. So as Kara was talking, and as you were adding on to the topics earlier on, I think one of the things that is quite important, and from our experience of the work we have done in Fiji and in the region, is we have a unique understanding of who we are as a people, and our understanding of what it means when we say these words around gender equality, inclusion, and all of that, contextually situating that amongst us and having an understanding is very important. And so I think for all the advisors that perhaps are in Fiji, you have an organization that is from here, which can we can help understand, break down these concepts and build that understanding. So for FWRM, we have a lot of experience in doing exactly that, in ensuring that as an organization, a group of individuals, businesses, we unpack sometimes what may sound very confusing. We don't necessarily use these terms all the time, but we are, as mentioned earlier on, it's in our laws. We are meant to be inclusive. We are meant to be not discriminating against anyone based on their gender, sexuality, disability, etc. But what does it actually mean when we say gender being inclusive in terms of gender and disability, and looking at social inclusion as well? So we have developed very simple training toolkits. We have broken down these concepts, and we are able to provide a number of trainings which are listed, such as gender awareness, gender sensitization, even help you do some analysis, step-by-step guide as to how do we analyze our what you're trying to do. Say, for example, if you have a project or a business idea, or you're developing a particular program, and you need to put understand the gender elements of it, gender disability inclusion elements of it, then we can show you the step-by-step ways as to how to do that. But it begins, of course, with an understanding, so gender awareness, being aware of what it means around concepts of gender equality and disability and social inclusion. So we have a wealth of knowledge and expertise in trying to build that understanding in a very simple way and based on the realities that we have here locally. So we can also build on what our laws and policies say, what our culture says, what we as a people, because as we know, society is constantly moving, and in Fiji, as we know, who are our business clients, who are our customers. These are a new generation of people that are inspired by businesses who have this kind of outlook. And as was mentioned much earlier on, there is a business case for this more and more. And and why not? It's 2021 now, and why can't we keep up with times and be inclusive in all dimensions, not just looking at having more women on board, but a whole gamut. Everybody is has skills and qualifications, and can definitely fit in many different situations and contribute in many unique ways. So but it all begins with understanding what these concepts are, how do we incorporate it, what is our regulatory framework in country, and how do we incorporate it, how do we maximize on what we have existingly, what do we need to put in to ensure that we don't set up the roadblocks for this inclusion, and how do we get to that step by step is something that FWRM can help with, and we have a lot of expertise in this. And of course, it begins with institutionalizing these step-by-step processes in writing up policies. So we have GESI policies to be written up. We can have policies that look at sexual harassment. We can look at step-by-step guides as to how that has to happen. And as we see, we usually set up a lot of policies and guidelines. However, there is often roadblocks in terms of having it implemented. So that's in where we have a process of having an inclusive approach of developing these policies. So we firmly believe in that it's not just the management's role or human resources role to be developing policies for the organization. We believe that everyone should be collectively inputting into setting policies for themselves, as what we know from practice is that once that is done collectively, and when everybody understands what is there in terms of what guides their practice and in their workplace, then it makes much more sense. It really presents a healthier work environment. And of course, you are then in alignment with the regulatory frameworks that we have as well. So, Barbara?
Oh, thank you. And I see on the slide you also talk about establishing progress markers, and what you mean by that is what are the kind of indicators where you've had an impact with some of those policy development or policy settings that you've established. So I think that's a really important thing. I mean, not only is it about reviewing your organizational policies, but also about thinking about milestones and indicators of change that you need to establish as well. So doing things like employee surveys, really important. That's a great suggestion that you've got on there. Okay, so other ways to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you just run through some of those for us?
Definitely. Yes, training is very important. Because what we realize is that there is a lot of fluidity and movement and growth in terms of how these concepts keep evolving. It's confusing. So say, for example, if we are talking about gender, gender as a social construct, that it keeps evolving. So there's a continuous need to keep sort of unpacking what we would like to say, unlearn and relearn, because it's a fast moving world out there, and so are these concepts. And I think for businesses to keep progressing, there is of course an element of ongoing training and sensitization, because we uh, you know uh, are in that fast-paced world where things are constantly being thrown at us, and sometimes when we don't understand, we put up the barriers, and that often then prevents the diversity and inclusion elements into the work we do. So ongoing training is definitely useful, because it shows growth, and you can bring that into your business planning elements. And secondly, it's imperative that in this time, and with the way in which knowledge and technology is moving, that we continuously upgrade our knowledge in terms of how do we present, or how do we become a business model that is fair and inclusive and equitable, and provides opportunity to all, without appearing to be one over the other. Sometimes discrimination can be misconstrued, to think that, oh, if I hire have a policy to say we'll be hiring women, these many percentage of women, then that's weighs the merit-based approach, so it's not necessarily that, but we are seeing overall, if we where have women been over the decades, in terms of the opportunities we have had. So and now that we have the same opportunities around education and attaining the skills, why not be provided with the opportunities of getting that same level of experience as well? So that comes in with ongoing upgradation of business knowledge. Yes, publicizing in-house training to as many organizations, business houses, and individuals as possible, because this concept, um, we can say it's fairly new, but it is getting worldwide recognition, as was mentioned by Kara with the statistics, and it makes a lot of sense, because if we are truly to say that we are accepting and as part of this modern world also inclusive, then we do need to do that. And yes, and
there's
yeah,
there's nothing like publicly committing to do something that makes you follow through with it,
yes,
which I think relates to that
that's
third and fourth point that you've got there. Yeah, no, that's they're really important points that you make there. Now, actually, Kara, can I just come back to you and ask you to talk about, and Nalini, you kind of alluded to this as well. You spoke about some of the unintended consequences of implementing, because there are sometimes, like people sometimes do misconstrue what you're trying to achieve with some of these policies. So, Kara, can I just ask you to talk to us about any unintended consequences, and perhaps if there are any other strategies that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I mean, as the two here kind of describe, the first is often employees who have been kind of privileged for so long, they start to misunderstand the direction that is being taken, and there's the some of the strategies around creating a voice for more people in meetings, and maybe making sure that promotion within an organization is fair. So some of those examples of different strategies might be seen as unfair to the groups that have been benefiting from policies and practices that an organization has been implementing for so long. So that's one. And so they may rise up or get angry or confront, the person making these decisions. So it's something to keep aware of. And the second can also be around kind of signaling that these underrepresented groups need help to succeed, that they can't do it of their own volition or of their own merit, that they need some sort of help because they aren't really as good as those who have already been benefiting from the system for so long. And I mean, as we've emphasized throughout this presentation and this discussion, that it's not necessarily about the fact that they need help in their skills. It's more that the system is not set up to, let's say, in meetings, hear everyone's voice. We simply just gravitate toward those who are willing to speak. So I think some strategies that can try to mitigate these unintended consequences should be things like communication, which is what you discussed at the beginning, Barbara, that we are starting, in an organization and as business advisors, providing your clients with advice around, as you make changes, share what these changes are with your organization. Talk about the benefits. You might be convinced that there's a business case and that you're going to improve your profits when you have more diversity or more inclusion, but they may not be aware of that same business case. So communicate, bring people on board, help them understand and be a part of the change, and maybe even get excited by the change, but at least be aware that this is happening, and that, what steps are you personally taking to generate these kinds of changes and to make things more inclusive, and then what the organization is doing. So these types of unintended consequences can happen, and they might even take the place of, okay, I'm going to change where changes are made on the surface, but real change isn't actually happening either, where, underrepresented groups, they might get a managerial role, but their actual responsibilities haven't changed and they're not being acknowledged. And so it might be a surface thing that, okay, now we've made the changes, this is great, but is there real change actually happening? Does that woman who's now being given a manager role actually taking on the responsibilities of being a manager and what that entails? So making sure that our strategies match what we're talking about, and that what we're talking about is matching our strategies, and bringing people on board and being a part of it, I think can really help to start anyway, to make some of these changes and help them be appreciated within an organization.
Oh, that's great. No, thank you. Now I'm going to swiftly move us on, because I'm very conscious of time, to our third topic, which is the BLP support. So Sandra, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now to tell us about BLP's GESI, or the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Subsidy. So Sandra, can you firstly tell us, what are BLP's goals, and why is BLP directing funding towards GESI, or Gender Equality and Social Inclusion?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. Great question. Yes, you were explaining at the beginning, and I don't want to cover the whole topic again, but basically BLP, what we do is to connect small and medium-sized businesses across the Pacific Islands to business advisors, to help them to get access to advice that will be helpful for the business. We cover 15 different areas, as I think you mentioned, and one of those areas is diversity and inclusion. And also, just to give another example, accounting, marketing, human resources, and areas like that are so important for businesses to be able to operate in a better way, but also to be able to have profits and to create employment, which is one of the main goals of Business Link Pacific. So that's exactly what we do. and the GESI subsidy, which is the topic that we're covering, is a very important part of BLP's GESI strategy, which Cara has helped us to develop over the years, and that we had been rolling out and trialing over a few years.
Oh, that's great. So tell us, what do advisors and businesses need to do to be eligible?
Right. So look, the GESI subsidy, we came out with the GESI subsidy a couple of years ago because we normally work with businesses that are between 5 and 50 employees. So that is in the Pacific Islands, a very sort of small portion of the population. You have a sort of a wider number of businesses that perhaps are smaller than that. So we needed to create a mechanism to help those smaller businesses to access business advisory services. So to access an accountant, for example, to access human resources support, or to build a new website if that's what they need to do. So that's why we created the GESI subsidy. So it is very specific to small businesses, and we have learned through the rollout of the subsidy that sometimes those jobs, those sort of services, are very small for business advisors. So we are very open to the possibility of grouping some small businesses. So one of the criteria indicates that you can bring a group of 10 businesses, for example. After 10 businesses, it can be 2, it can be 1, but it can be 5, all together to benefit from one specific service. So another thing that is very important to access the GESI subsidy is that you need to be a small business, so under 5 employees, and the business needs to be led by women, youth, indigenous people, and that will of course change depending on the country. As you mentioned before, Business Link operates in 8 different countries, so that will have different implications in each country, and other marginalized groups of people that feel that they don't have access to business advice that they really need to be able to improve their business and their profits. Yeah, so that's basically the most important criteria. And through the GESI subsidy, what you could access is business advice in different services. It's not necessarily just about diversity and inclusion. That is one of the areas where you can access advice. But we have 15 areas that can be supported by the GESI subsidy, which are very crucial for any business, really.
Okay, so and so there's kind of a couple of avenues. There's the SME itself that can apply, or there's also the business advisor that can apply on their behalf. So tell us a little bit about the eligible business advisors. What do they need to do?
Right. Yeah. Look, the business the subsidy is accessed through business advisory service providers. So I think you were mentioning at the beginning that we have over 130 something business advisors that are approved and are part of the Business Link Pacific network. So the subsidy is accessed through that network, through a business advisor that is approved. So we have the FRM. You guys are approved. Nalini, they are approved under the diversity and inclusion competency. So they are able to offer that subsidy to businesses that need support in that specific area. So what a business advisor service provider needs in order to offer that subsidy to small businesses, so they need to demonstrate gender equality and social inclusion awareness, which we've been talking about what that means in the last hour. So understanding that there are different needs, businesses that have different needs according to different criteria, including gender, but also goes beyond that. It also needs to demonstrate experience at working with smaller businesses and with businesses that perhaps have more barriers, more challenges than more established, robust businesses to access markets or just to function as a more as a normal business. And also the business advisor that wants to access and offer this service needs to show capacity. We have learned that this type of work needs a little bit more sort of time. It needs a little bit more effort to guide business owners through the processes that they need to learn and they need to put in place in order to improve their businesses. So there is a little bit more need for capacity there, and we would like to see that the business advisory service provider has that awareness, has that experience, and also has the capacity to guide business owners through those processes that sometimes can be complicated if you don't have the right background.
Okay, so what you're saying then is business advisors can really take a lead in this. They can think about their clients and think, right, I could perhaps target some of these clients, this one, and this one, for a GESI subsidy, and because they fulfill these criteria, and they'll be able to access my advisory services. So if you're a BASP, a business advisor, you can do that right now. And of course, you do need to be an approved business advisor. If you're an SME, though, you need to work through one of our approved advisors. So you need to be put in touch with one. Okay, now that's great. Thank you. So thinking about those small businesses, then can you perhaps just go over that again? What do they need to look like?
Right. So as I was mentioning before, we are targeting the small sort of end of the scale of businesses that are normally not part of our scope, but because it's important for us to make sure that our services and mainly business advice is accessed by those businesses that really need it, then we have created this criteria, which includes businesses that are led by women or youth, and we define youth between 18 and 30 years of age. It can be a business owner with Indigenous background that it's different in every country, and it's also any individual that has a vulnerable background, that that runs perhaps a very small business, that runs perhaps a very small operation.
Okay.
So that's very important for us. So the size of the business will inform the type of service that business needs, and also the size of the budget for that specific type of work, type of service.
And what sort of amounts are you subsidising?
Well, that is actually looked at case by case, and as I said before, it depends very much on the size of the business. So we don't want to provide a subsidy that is larger than the business itself. For example, we will look into what is that the business needs to do, what sort of service they need to access, and where they want to head off through that service, whether they want to employ more people, whether they want to access a new market, where are they going with that service, how they're going to improve their operation, their business through the service. We're also looking into businesses that hold a license or that are working towards having and obtaining that license. Businesses that have been operational for more than 6 months and are able to demonstrate they are a real business. So there is the need for maybe some bookkeeping demonstrated that they are indeed a real business. And we would like to see projects, as I said before, that are really looking to improve employment, to increase employment, to increase turnover, and to really maximize the opportunities for that business.
Great. So can you give us a couple of examples of what BLP's already done, what sort of subsidies they've already offered?
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I thought I lost you there for a minute. But yeah, if we go to the next slide, I don't know if you are showing it at the moment, but yeah, I mean, this is a very nice example, and we have chosen Vanuatu because it was actually the first market for us with the GESI subsidy. And we work with a couple of business advisor service providers that are approved by BLP for two different competencies or areas. One of them is approved for diversity and inclusion, and the other one for business strategy. So they both came together and brought together 5 different businesses that met all the criteria that we spoke about before, being led by women, by young people, young entrepreneurs, or people with indigenous backgrounds, or people that felt that they needed that extra support. So this is what I have in the slide is an example of one of those businesses that came together. This is a business of 3 women that are offering accounting services and other business advisory services to small businesses that came together. They received coaching, training, and also access to a working space, internet, and other things that are necessary for operating. And they benefited not only from the actual service, the actual training that they received, but also by being in a group of entrepreneurs that could discuss the same sort of issues that they go through and could support each other through that process. So this is a really, really good example of what the GESI subsidy can do. So we had, a lot of teamwork here. We had VLab and we had Jumi Work, and we also have another 5 different businesses that came together all to work and to grow together, really. So that's kind of a very good example of that.
Wrong button there. That's a great example of the collaboration, and I see that BLP covered 80% of the costs of those, so that's really good. Nalini, also I noticed that Fiji Women's Rights Movement's also receiving a BLP subsidy, a GESI subsidy. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that. That's for some of your training, I think, isn't it?
That's right. It's currently ongoing now in Fiji with a few businesses, and it's a training on stopping sexual harassment in the workplace, beginning with an awareness session, mostly in regards to what is the policy environment, and as well as what are some types of harassment, and what can be done to actually stop this practice. So for us, yes, this is being 100% subsidized by BLP. And I think at the moment we have just completed one for a business, and I think next week there's another one. So sexual harassment awareness and prevention is also part of this particular set of training.
It's a great opportunity. I see BLP subsidising that training, those particular workshops, 100%. So that's fantastic. So if looks like you've got some spaces still. If you know of any more SMEs that can benefit from that in Fiji, certainly send them Nalini's way. So no, that's great. Sandra, thank you very much for explaining the GESI subsidy. It sounds fabulous, and certainly one that I encourage our business advisors to look at and see if they can access that. So no, thank you very much. It's been really interesting. I'm really conscious that we've gone over time with the discussions that we've had, but it has been very thought-provoking. I'd like to ask our participants now, are there any other questions, any questions or comments that you'd like to make? If so, if you could pop those either in the chat box or you can raise your hand and then turn on your microphone to ask a question. So I'll just give you a little moment if there are any things that you want to raise there for our guests whilst we've got them here with us. So lucky to have such a lot of knowledge in this chat room today. So yeah, please do pop your comments or questions in there now. But whilst you're thinking about that, perhaps, Cara, perhaps I could come back to you and maybe just from your perspective, could you kind of summarise what you think the key takeaways from today's session are? Yeah, if I could just get you to do that.
Sure, yeah. I would say I think the key takeaways are that, you know, as we think about the skills that are required for business advisors, understanding that, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion, this particular skill set is something unique, and it does require a lot of understanding and experience and knowledge. So it's not something, just as, you know, not everyone can be an accountant, not everyone can be a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist. But on that note, I think if we start to really expand or understand what these concepts mean, we can understand that, you know, there is a business case for it. And so, you know, that businesses benefit when there's more diversity, equity, and inclusion within their organizations. So the business case is clear. There are a lot of barriers that exist to being able to promote and really hold these principles in place within an organization. So it's really important to understand that things like unconscious bias show up, things like and all of the elements around different biases definitely show up. There are unintended consequences when we do start to try to implement these types of changes. And but if we do it slowly, if we continue to communicate about the changes that we're making, then it will slowly take hold. And I think as business advisors, taking on some of these skills and starting to appreciate that these are things that businesses can do, that they don't have to be major changes. It needs to start small. It really can help to make some change within an organization, regardless of whatever it is that they're working in. The diversity, equity, and inclusion is a competency area that people can hold, and all businesses will require this. They just don't always know it. Yeah, I think that's
Right.
that in a nutshell.
Thank you. Nalini, any further thoughts from you in summary?
Yes, I absolutely support what Cara and you have said. There is definitely, a business case for all businesses, in fact, to be one, understanding the concepts behind, gender inclusiveness, equity, and being aware of, what it means for us, in a contextually sensitive way, and being on par with how can we be a business, an organization that is set up in this modern times to be setting up policies in a collective way where there is an environment where everyone is happy to work in, and they're productive and contributing, and because we do tend to spend a lot of time in our workplaces, so they might as well be happy places. So and in doing these little steps with the help that we can provide, in a step-by-step, easy to understand and implement, why not do it? Because the opportunity is here, and definitely the help is here, and BLP is providing the subsidies. Make good use of it, and let's be true to the forms, that in terms of who we are, as a society, and let's be prosperous while we are making a go at it. So I'd leave it at there, Barbara.
Thank you. Sandra, any final remarks from you?
Yeah, no, I just enjoyed the chat very much, and learning every time that we had the chance to talk about these topics. But I just want to say that Business Link Pacific really acknowledges the important role that businesses can have in promoting inclusion, diversity. We understand the business case for inclusion, and I just invite businesses to look the criteria for the GESI subsidy, which I just put in the chat box. Is on our website as well, and see how your business or other businesses can benefit from that opportunity. But yeah, thank you, Barbara, and it's been really informative, and it feels really good talking about these topics.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Cara, Nalini, and Sandra. I do hope today's session has sparked an interest amongst our business advisors to think about how else they can assist their clients with issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion, alongside their technical advisory services, of course. And I hope that that you can tap into the GESI and other subsidies that BLP provides. Doesn't look like we've got any other questions, but if you would like more information on BLP's GESI subsidy, Sandra's posted a link, or there's other support that you can see on this slide. But the other thing I'd like to invite you to do is to get in touch by completing a very short survey that we're just that's in the chat box. It's actually at the top of the chat box that Sandra's posted. Or Sandra, I might just ask you to post that survey link again as well. Right there it is. So if you click on that link now as well, you can ask us if there's more information that you want, engage with us directly with that. And also, if you don't need any more information, we'd really appreciate it if you could also click on that link to give us some very quick feedback on today's session, as it really does help us to identify how we can best tailor these webinars to meet your needs. So thank you again to our three guests. I've really enjoyed this topic. It's been great to get your advice on how to implement changes effectively in business, and changes that are so hard to make. That does now conclude our webinar for today, but please do take a moment to complete that survey. We'll stop recording now, but if there are any further comments or any queries that you'd like to address with us, you're very welcome to stay online. Just one other quick announcement that I'd also like to make before we go, though, and that's that it's Cybersecurity Week this week. Some of you may recall that we held another great webinar a few months ago with CERT New Zealand and CERT Tonga on cybersecurity. And we're going to be holding another webinar next Tuesday with them to mark Cybersecurity Week. So if you missed out on the last webinar, or if you want more information, watch out for an invite from BLP shortly, because there'll be another extra webinar session on cybersecurity. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Malo opito, whaafatai lava, thank you Tomas, vinaka, metaki maiata, and looking forward to seeing you all again next month. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.